Welcome to 10 to 1, the podcast where my guest can read 10 languages and I can read one.
Is that what it is?
I'm Brian Kozer, and welcome to the show, Deacon Seraphim Richard Rohlin.
Yeah, very happy to be here.
Yeah, I've been listening to you, so it's been a one-sided relationship. So happy to call up a stranger and.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry it took so long. What the audience may not know is that we've been trying to arrange this for like several months now, and it's always my fault that it falls through. So just happy to actually be here to finally doing this.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited to start this series. I'm really good at starting podcast series.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah, me too, as it happens.
Yeah. Well, usually a series for me is a one episode talk about some subject. We'll see if that happens here. It might be maybe just restricted based on audience or on potential people I can talk to. But first, let me introduce you for those that don't know Deacon Seraphim. He is a deacon in the Orthodox Church of America, now former data analyst and software developer.
Still data analyst.
Okay.
Because I do some work for so I'm the director of analytics for the Symbolic World for the Orthodox Studies Institute. So now I do data analytics, but I do it for the benefit of the Orthodox Church, basically just trying to help the Orthodox Church in America plan for the future. We have a lot of converts right now, as maybe some people have heard. We have a lot of different things going on, and so all of these things need logistics. And back in the old days, in the first couple of chapters of the Book of Acts, when the apostles needed logistics, they created my order. So that's what I'm here to do is basically offer logistical support to the church. So I still do that. I also am one of the owners and I am the COO of the Symbolic World Press. We make lots of beautiful books. I just happen to have one next to me. They are beautiful classic retellings of fairy tales and other things as well. Yeah, look at that. We have a lot of other stuff that's going to be coming out very soon, some of which we'll be announcing pretty soon, which I'm very, very excited about. But so I run the Symbolic World Press, and we also have courses. I am a Germanic philologist by education. So we have a lot of classes around that from the Symbolic World courses, and also I'm a really big Dante's Divine Comedy guy. So we have 50-60 hours of just Divine Comedy content courses that people can get into if they're interested. So I do those things. Yeah. I also am a full-time podcaster for Ancient Faith Radio. I've got a couple of new shows. One is called The Great Rood Screen, which is about medieval Christianity, and the other is about specifically it's about Christianity in the British Isles before the Great Schism. So St. Columba, St. Patrick, St. Bridget, all those things, and then kind of going along with that is we have a podcast called The Orthodox Pilgrim, where we are basically going to these places and taking cameras and microphones and reading the stories, telling the stories of the different saints, in the very places where they walked. So, for instance, I got to read the life of the Venerable Bede in the on the actual stones where he stood and prayed. Which for me, Bede has always kind of been the guy. Like, it was just unbelievable to get to do that. So things like that. So we make stuff like that. We just got back from a pilgrimage to starting at Iona and then going down to Lindisfarne. So basically following the historical path of the Ionan mission. So that will be coming out. I think the first episode's due to drop any day now. It's called The Raven and the Dove from the Orthodox Pilgrim on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. But then we are already planning our next trip, which will be to Ireland in the summer. So yes, so that's my day job.
The dream.
I get to go to Ireland for work. So yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry I took over the introduction thing, but I just have too many things going on. So yeah.
And we'll bring those up again at the end. We'll link to those.
Cool.
And if you'll take some constructive criticism. Too much content. I was already not able to keep up with you. So also, I prefer to listen. I usually listen to podcasts if I'm mowing the lawn,
Yep.
doing work or something. It's hard to do that when I have to stop every 2 minutes to write something down or go follow some side trail. So if you could,
information is too interesting.
fewer podcasts, less interesting. Yeah.
Well, you're the first person who's never asked for that, as far as I know. So yeah, I don't know what we can do about that, but we'll see. We'll see.
Okay.
Yeah.
So also in addition to those qualifications, and a poet and a tabletop RPG designer.
Yep, forgot those things, but I do those things too.
On top of those, none of which we're actually talking about today. Talking about your life as a homeschool dad, or at least an educator.
Yeah.
So tell me about how you found Charlotte Mason, homeschooling, classical. I know also classical.
Yeah.
Without, I don't think we need to dive into distinguishing those too much today. But tell me about how you ended up in that world.
Yeah, so I'm a second generation homeschooler, as is my wife. So we were both homeschooled growing up. I grew up in the sort of fundamentalist Bill Gothard, Bob Jones, University Press, Becca, like that whole world. I mean, I literally, when I was a teenager between high school and college, I worked for Bill Gothard. Like I cleaned his carpets. So like the first season of Shiny Happy People, that was my childhood, basically. Now, nothing bad ever happened to me, although I knew plenty of people who had a really bad experience. But so I grew up being homeschooled, and always just assumed I was going to homeschool my kids. Like it was never really a question. The only thing that's ever made me question that was when I was introduced to a really good Charlotte Mason school, which I'll talk about in a moment because it's part of the story. Anyway, so my wife, also the same. We have 6 children now. Our oldest is just about to go into her high school years. So we've been doing this a little bit. Wow. But they're all in the pipeline somewhere. So we've been doing the Charlotte Mason thing from the very beginning. So I highly recommend it. I think it works really well. It's been really good for us, and I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But as far as how we got to know Charlotte Mason, so I'm an Orthodox deacon now, but I was not always thus. As I mentioned, I grew up in very kind of fundamentalist Baptist circles, and so lots of love for those people, still lots of love for that world. No bitterness. But I was a pastor for about 8 years as a Baptist, and I was not happy with like Awana or like any of the extracurricular like evening activity sort of things that the denomination I was in actually had to offer kids. And so my wife and I decided, this is kind of before, I think we had our youngest, or maybe our youngest 2, but they were really small. This was before they started school. We decided that we would kind of take this on. And so we started doing, she started doing something with the young girls on Wednesday nights, and I started doing something with the boys. And what I did was the things that were interesting to me, which were things like archery and knot tying and, just stuff like this. But then also we, I thought it would be fun, because like boys like battles. So I thought it would be fun to take the boys through as a book. What's the book called? It's like, oh my goodness, I should have looked this up because I haven't read this now in years, but it's like 7 battles or 10 battles that changed history. What is that book called?
I don't know this one, but 10 is a good number.
Yeah, I think it's 10. Yeah. Yeah, I cannot remember the name of this book, but it's kind of a classic book now.
I'm sure it's got Marathon.
The title of the book is called From Marathon to Waterloo.
Yeah.
Like something 10 battles that changed the world, something like that. It was written within living memory of the Battle of Waterloo, so it was written kind of back in the day. It is definitely what in Charlotte Mason education would be called a living book. That is, it is written by somebody with a lively interest in the subject, and it's basically trying to tell a cohesive narrative, which is that you can kind of trace the thread of Western civilization through these battles. Now, obviously, there's more to it than that, but But anyway, I think I thought it was a great book. And so I took the boys through this, and basically for each one of the battles, we'd read through the chapter together, and then we'd come up with various ways of interacting with it in different ways. So whether it was making miniatures, and setting up miniature battles, I've
Mm,
always been into miniature gaming. Sometimes we would use like the Rome Total War simulator,
mm, mhm.
to like simulate some of to simulate some of these battles and things like
Cool.
that. Anyway, we just had a lot of fun with it. Um, Obviously, so one day we're discussing the second siege of Syracuse, and this young
As one
man,
does.
as one does, which is one of the battles that's listed in there, not the first or the third siege of Syracuse, but the second siege of Syracuse. And so we're discussing this siege, which happens as part of the Peloponnesian War, and the one of the boys in my class, Andrew, his mom was the person who eventually introduced us to Charlotte Mason. So,
Mm,
and Andrew's a fine young man. He's turned out really well. He's out teaching at flight school now.
nice.
I just really really love him. I wish he lived closer so I could see him more. But it's just one of those. Sometimes you have a student who's just like like sticks in your memory, and you're like,
Mm,
oh yeah, this guy.
yeah.
So anyway, Andrew, who at the time is 9 years old, which I have a son who just turned 9. So, he pipes up and he says, "Oh yes, we read about that in Plutarch." And I just looked at him and was like, "Oh, sure you did, kid." And he was like, "No, no, no, we really did." And so afterwards, I go to his mom, Natalie, and I say, "What's going on? Like, what are you guys doing for
Yeah.
education? What are you guys doing at home?" And that was and I was really interested in this question because, like I said, I have a lot of love for the people that raised me, especially, they were really trailblazers. My parents were really trailblazers, doing home education at a
Yeah.
time when there's very little support for that in Texas,
Yeah.
or anywhere in the US. And, but I knew that I did not want to do it the way that my parents did it. Like we were not going to do IBLP. We were not going to do all those things. Like
Right.
I at this point in my life, I already knew where the deficiencies were and the things that I didn't want my family to be a part of. So I was looking for alternatives. So, like, I still want to homeschool, but I'm looking for some alternatives.
Right.
And so so she introduced me to Charlotte Mason, and of course, we read the Pink Books together. My wife and I started, listening to some of the early Charlotte Mason podcasts. Started following some of the stuff done by, various organizations out there. I mean, all the ones that you would think of,
Mm,
and became just really, really interested in the whole thing. And I was especially interested in it from as a perspective. By training, I'm a medievalist, and so there was something about the perspective that felt very holistic and very medieval to me in a
right.
holistic way. Whereas in the Middle Ages, there was not specialized education. In the Middle Ages, you got if you were receiving a lettered education, you just got the one education. It was the same one that everybody got. Now, it might be better or worse depending on where you were studying and who you were studying under, but there was this idea
Right.
that there's this, the whole idea of the liberal arts. They are the arts of making someone free, right? That's the whole kind of idea. And within the classical world, I don't want to get into this too much, but within the classical world, there are definitely approaches that are just, hey, let's do the same thing they're doing in public schools. Let's just make the quality better, and then let's call it classical.
Right.
And there's all kinds of different arguments basically about what it means for education to be classical. And there was something in the Charlotte was doing, but for me, a classical education is really a medieval education. That's
Mm,
what we're going for, especially as Christians. Like we want to be
right.
educated,
Yep.
in a way in which God is the one who holds everything together, and in which Christ is the center of history, and so on. And so
Right.
there was something about Charlotte's stuff that just felt very, very medieval to me, which I really
Mm,
loved. And so we started doing that with our kids. Now, the the after a few months or a couple of years of looking into this and being interested in this, as our oldest was finally hitting an age where she was about to start school,
mm,
I took a week off of work and we went down to a big Charlotte Mason school, Ambleside Schools International in Fredericksburg, Texas.
Wow.
And we did like a sort of a teacher's apprenticeship thing there, where we got to basically sit in on a bunch of classes, and then as part of sitting in on the classes, at the end of the day, we'd go and we'd sit down and we would basically just read Charlotte's stuff together with
Mm,
the instructor, um,
nice.
and then he would basically do the things to us, like he would make us narrate, which, if as an adult, like having
Yeah.
somebody make you narrate the way that, now I take it for granted that I'm allowed to do this to my kids, but if
Right.
you're doing it for the first time as an adult, it's actually quite challenging.
Yeah.
And so we did all of that, and I was Bill St. Cyr is the instructor, and I was really captivated by him and captivated by the whole school there.
Mm,
And that is where, basically for the first time in my life, I'd found a school that I said, hey, if I lived here, I would just send my kids here.
right.
Like
Right.
this is something totally different, totally unique. And that's also where we met some friends of ours, one of whom was at the time kind of the headmaster of their upper school there.
Mm,
And he's my godfather now. So that
wow.
was actually also our introduction to Orthodoxy was there at the
Okay.
school. And so for us, we kind of fell into both things at once, and they've always gone very closely together. And I do think
Yeah.
there's a lot about Charlotte's stuff, just because she does take a very she takes a very orthodox approach
Mm,
towards the personhood of children,
mm.
which is the thing that I think drew my wife and I the most to what she does. And
Okay.
there's
Say more
something
about
about
that. So, like,
um,
children are born persons.
yeah, children are born persons. This idea that that the child is this blank slate
Mm.
that you get to mold into your own image, um,
Not that.
which was very prevalent in the
Yeah.
world that I grew up in.
Sure.
Very prevalent, and to the point that one of the things that people had the biggest problem with was trying to handle when their kids became teenagers,
Mm,
and they start becoming not just little copies of you.
right.
And it's like, or actually they are copies of you, but now they're copies of your less desirable traits or whatever. But
Yeah.
as people, I saw this in my own family. I saw this in lots of other families that were all, this kind of like failure to launch, you could call it that, but really it was like a
Mm,
failure to release. It was, parents
mm,
were not able, because they'd been, basically the sun, moon, and stars to their children for so long. They were just not able to kind of let them go and let them grow.
right.
And so this respecting the personhood of your children, I think,
Yeah.
is a really, really important part of things. And I mean, I'll tell you something that really kind of blew me away. Um, this is one of the pink books, but Bill was talking about this. Like this is one of those moments in my life that everything turned a corner for me.
Hmm.
Was when we were going through, and I can't remember which book it was now, but we were talking about basically how to train people, how to train children, how to train them to, I think Charlotte gives the example of like, all right, the child is slamming a door or they're just forgetting to close the door. Well, how do you address that?
Right.
And so she starts walking through like the different ways you can address that and the ones that work and the ones that don't work. But in the process of all of that, she says that there are basically three reasons that humans misbehave. They say three reasons we don't do the things that we're supposed to do. The first reason is out of ignorance. I don't know the right thing to do, so I do the wrong thing. The
Mm,
second reason is out of weakness. I know the right thing to do, but I'm too weak to do it, so I'm going to do the wrong thing. And the third is rebellion. I know the right thing to do. I could do the right thing, but I am choosing to do the opposite instead.
yeah.
When young children act out, this is what Charlotte says, and
Mm,
in my experience, this has been true. When young children act out, it is almost always for the first two reasons.
mm,
The
yeah.
problem is that the middle reason, weakness, did not exist in the world that I grew up in.
Mhm.
So if you are misbehaving in my family growing up, or in that whole world, it's either
Right.
ignorance, in which
Which
case
is, I'll
let
interrupt
me
real quick. We did also, my wife
yeah
and I also grew up independent fundamental Baptist.
yeah
Still have family in that, so I definitely know where you're coming from.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
if you misbehave in that world, then the first
yeah.
thing is, oh, you must be ignorant, so let me inform your ignorance.
Sure.
So then you get like a talking to from an adult. and they tell you all the ways that you're wrong and things like this, and now they're like, and now you know, so you'll never do it again. And then of course, because you're 6, you do it again. But now at this point, it's like, well, it can't be ignorance because I've already informed your ignorance. Weakness does not exist as a category that we recognize, so it must be rebellion. And what's really interesting is, I mentioned my journey to the Orthodox Church really coincided also with my, the process of doing Charlotte Mason education with my children. In the Orthodox spiritual tradition, it's very much like this. And so in the Orthodox Church, we have we have confession, we go to, but the confession is not it's not like in a movie where you're sitting in a booth and you can't see the guy's face and you say, "Forgive me, Father, I've sinned. It has been this long since my last confession." And you list some things off, and then he's like, "Go do these Hail Marys." That's what, but rather you're not confessing to a faceless person. The person you're confessing to is your spiritual father. So it's another person, and of course you're doing this ultimately to Christ, but you're doing it, this person is here to bear witness. But it's a person who loves you. It's a person who has been involved in your life for a long time. It's a person who knows you and your family history and the way that you behave, and has heard a lot of your confessions, since they also kind of know when to say, like, sometimes when they need to be a little more harsh with you and say, "Listen, I know you can do better than this, and you know you can do better than this," right? But sometimes also, it's there's a saying from one of our modern saints: "If the confessor has mildness, the soul is saved." And the idea is that sometimes what you need to be told is, "Hey, you're just trusting too much in yourself. You think you're stronger than you are. And you need to be actually not super surprised that you fell into the sin, because you're weak, and with God's help, you're going to get stronger, and I'm going to be here with you for that." But this the sense of just understanding, it's not always about. In fact, it's almost never about you need to be punished. It's almost never about that. Most of the time, it is you are weak, and you don't actually realize how weak you are. There's an old medieval classic spiritual text called Unseen Warfare. And in Unseen Warfare, the authors, and there are actually numerous authors. The version that we have that we kind of used in the Orthodox Church was redacted and edited by Saint Theophan the Recluse. But in any case, there's a bunch of different hands, both east and west, that have gone into this book. And in that book, the author says that the idea of unseen warfare or spiritual warfare is really about the war for your thoughts, the war for your attention, which is the most important thing that we're fighting right now. And the most important battle that we can fight for our children is the battle for their attention. And in any case, he says basically, to accomplish this warfare, to be successful in spiritual warfare and the war for your thoughts, you need 4 things. And the first is an absolute distrust in yourself, just to acknowledge that you're weak, that you can't do anything in your own strength. The second thing you need is an absolute total trust in God. And then he describes what it will look like. And the other 2 weapons are the training of the will and unceasing prayer. But in the first, talking about the first 2, he actually describes like what it will look like when you sin if you trust in yourself. One of the things that you will do is, if you really trust in yourself and in your own strength, when you sin, you are more likely to actually fall into despair. Well, why? Well, it's because I thought I could do it myself.
Yeah.
Right. But if you don't trust in yourself and you're trying to just put your confidence in God, then when you fall into sin, which you're probably going to do because you're weak, you're going to say, "Yeah, that's about right. That's that's about right. That's what I get for trusting in myself. And so now next time I'm going to try to call upon God and ask him to come and help me and deliver me from this temptation, because I'm not strong enough to handle it on my own." So things like that. So for me, there's a lot of the way that sin, and you could say like training, is treated in the Orthodox Church, the way that personhood is treated in the Orthodox Church, which is a deep respect for the personhood of every single human person. It sounds weird from the outside, but actually in the Orthodox Church, there are no rules at all. There are no rules at all. There are just things that we do because we love God. And we have a sort of descriptive understanding of what it will look like to love God, and that's the life that we're trying to live together. But at the end of the day, the Orthodox perspective on the human person is that humans are born with free will. The only thing that constrains our will is actually not God, it's our passions and our sins.
Hmm.
And so when I'm not able to choose the good, that is because my freedom is being restricted by my passions and my sins. But with God's help, as I overcome those, my will becomes more and more free, which means that I am more and more able to choose the good, ultimately to choose to draw closer to Christ. And
Right.
to me, all of this stuff is like, it's very, Charlotte Mason understood this stuff. It seems to me very intuitively, because it's it's not even something she necessarily would have gotten from her contemporary religious milieu.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
anyway, so that all that to say, I feel like there's a lot of kind of crossovers between her approach to things, her methodology for approaching things, and then the spiritual life that we live in the Orthodox Church, our liturgical life, and everything else. It all goes together very well.
Oh, that's really interesting. And it did make me think. That does seem like more of an Eastern thought, but I think Saint Augustine also said, "Love and do as you will" is one of the.
Yeah.
I think Tom Holland quotes that in Dominion as one of his uh, comparisons to the Beatles. Then, but yeah. So that's really interesting. Then what? What does that look like for you? Having that shared philosophy, but then um, I guess the content then and the I guess curriculum. Did you start with something like Ambleside Online and then
Yeah.
kind of modify it?
I mean, we use Ambleside Online still. I mean, that's
Okay.
what we've used since the beginning. Basically, what we have done is to swap out some of the more puritanical texts, let's say,
Yeah. Trial and Triumph
for
is probably a
for
no.
things. Well, so I mean, for instance, it's not that I don't want them to know that those things happened, right? But
No.
obviously, Trial and Triumph is told from one particular perspective.
Right.
You could write that same book, for instance, from the Catholic side, because also lots of Catholics got burned at the stake and tortured and hung
Yes.
and
Of course.
all those things. Like it's just not a good time. Like we were not sending our
Right.
best at that particular point in history. But in the Orthodox Church, we have a large multi-volume book called the Synaxarion, which
Mm.
is basically a book of the lives of the saints and martyrs that are celebrated each day in the Orthodox Church. And since the kids were very small, I've basically just been reading that to them every day. So we do assign them kind of, hey, I want you to get to know this saint from this particular era of history, because for every one of the eras of history that we're studying, there's saints to learn about.
Mm.
The other thing that I would say is that, from my perspective, is kind of lacking in an Ambleside online curriculum. It's just the fact that obviously it's very focused on the Western European and more specifically the
Mm.
Anglophone world. And to
Hmm.
some extent, that's fine because obviously we're speaking English, we're Western
Right.
Europeans, or we're descended from them. So that's fine. But also, there's a whole other half of Europe, which is also part of my children's heritage,
Right.
because they've all grown up in the Orthodox Church. And so we also have things that we add in from that, just so that they should know something about the history of the Eastern Empire. They should know something
Mm.
about the history of Russia. They should know, hey, there was actually a Greek Orthodox response to the Enlightenment and the French Revolution.
Mm.
Might be good to know what that was,
Hmm.
and so on. The world was actually much more interconnected back then than people tend to want to acknowledge today or realize today. So the good news is, again, I have all the texts. Like I have access to all the stuff. There's
Right.
a lot of great stuff out there. We are living in the worst age for many things, but the absolute best age for easily available translations of medieval texts. Like this
Yeah.
is, it's never been a better time for that.
It's crazy.
So you can, I mean, with a few dollars now, you can basically, and a, day and a half shipping on Amazon, you can assemble a really impressive library of all the most important medieval stuff that will not be in Mortimer Adler's great books list or things like that. But stuff that's, very important to me. So
Mm.
that's the that's the world that the kids grow up in, because we have you know uh, because we have a lectionary that we follow in the Orthodox Church, and because
Mm.
we have saints' lives that we follow stay in the Orthodox Church, we basically let that take care of the religious education side of things.
Yeah.
And then we give the children like other assigned Bible reading and spiritual reading as it's kind of according to their strength. I think that one of the things that we did was to I'm not a big fan of Pilgrim's Progress. I feel bad saying that because
Yeah.
everybody like sees it as this great masterpiece,
Mm.
and I'm just not a huge fan. It's very Calvinist, which is not my deal at all.
Right.
So we replaced it with Way of the Pilgrim, which is a kind of a classic Orthodox spiritual text,
Mm.
similar
It
kind of
still has
thing.
pilgrim in the name.
A guy goes on a journey,
Mm.
but the journey, thing that he's seeking is the unceasing remembrance of God, which is at the heart of our spirituality. So
Mm.
we've done some things like that, and
Yeah.
then we also work in, obviously iconography is a really important and rich part of our tradition as Orthodox Christians. So we have classes on that, both understanding it as part of art appreciation, like doing art studies, picture studies, but
Mm.
then also I have one daughter who's actually taking a class right now to learn to paint icons and so on. So
Wow.
things like that. And then as much as possible, we just try to live very close to nature. We always have some kind of animal being born here. We live on an acre on the edge of town. What
Mm.
used to be the edge of town, actually, sadly, since I
Mm.
bought this place, a lot of stuff has grown up around it. But we live on an acre on the edge of town, and then we're also part owners of a larger farm outside of town.
Nice.
And so we basically just try to keep the kids doing things with animals as much as possible. So like I said, right now we have about 11 puppies, but there's always some kind of animal being born. There's always something to take care of, their daily chores to do. I think all that stuff is
Mm.
just really important for
Yeah.
getting a sense of yourself as a person living in the world.
Mm.
So we do a
Right.
lot of those sorts of things. Yeah.
Right. Not pushing back against the sort of compartmentalized modern experience of like I never see where my food comes from.
Right.
We can eat strawberries all year round and um, never see, never experience death in any way.
I gave a talk
Mm.
at a Circe Institute
Mm.
conference last fall, and basically the premise of the entire thing was the worst thing about the modern world is the fact that you can buy blueberries any time of the year,
Mm.
and like this is damaged
Yeah.
us fundamentally as human beings in a way that we can't even actually fathom.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely Melissa, my wife, is that's something a journey she's been on the last few years. So, uh, I wanted to ask, maybe you can help me a little bit with as we also do Ambleside Online, and
Mhm.
also in a similar grew up homeschooled, and yeah, did Bob Jones, did a bunch of different curricula, just well, we're uh, what is it? I'm an American. I am and a Baptist. What's more, so it's the independent. Do what you want to do. Make your own list, kind of a thing. And I've tried to push back against that in trying to find curated lists. So for homeschooling, that's finding Ambleside online and kind of trusting the people that are putting that together that know way more than I do. Our oldest is 10, so we've been doing this for only a few years, and so I feel like maybe I've swung too far back in the other direction of this is the plan. I'm going to stick to it. Who am I to swap a book out or
Yeah.
to adjust something for a family? So I don't want to just be I don't like parables from nature. It really annoys me when
Mm.
the children come and narrate that to me. So I don't want it to be like we're just going to do the things that I like, but also there is that responsibility of of you know, and the opportunity when you're homeschooling to customize
Sure.
to your family. Help me think through that a little bit.
I think that one of the things that I try to say, this is going to be a rule for us as parents, and I don't always, stick to it. But this is always my goal, is to say we're not going to make decisions out of fear. So we'll never make a decision out of fear as parents. So
Okay.
if something is, if we're going to decide to do something, we're going to do it because it's what we really believe is good for our family, and not just because we're afraid. And I think a lot of times the impulse to censor or the impulse to filter things out maybe does come from a place of fear. So the first thing to do is to step back from that a little bit and just say, actually, no, we're not going to make this about fear, but what we want to make this about is what's actually good for the kids, like what's actually good for their, if you should have an image, like a vision of what it looks like. More importantly, as they get older, they should have the vision of what it looks like for them to be a happy, healthy, fully realized human being made in the image of God, using their unique charisms, their gifts, their talents for God's glory, right? Trying to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah.
And how to implement that. That is, again, early on it's your vision, and then later on it has to become their vision. And that switchover is, as I mentioned, it's a thing that was never handled well
Tough.
in my upbringing. Yeah, it's really hard. Like, I can see how hard it's going to be already. Like, my oldest is about to turn 14, so like it's just like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
But I just say all that to say that first of all, when we're talking about what to include or what not to include, we want to, as much as possible, try to take fear out of the question, and then just say, hey, which of these things are going to really be, okay, so you don't like nature parables. Well, why not? Why not? Is you just feel like the stories are kind of hokey? Is it like, what's the, what part of this doesn't align with the vision that you have kind of, it's like, okay, well, you don't like nature parables. Do you like, what about a medieval bestiary, right? It's the same kind of idea, right? It's like, you can look at this thing, can look at this thing in nature. And of course, like we would, from medieval bestiaries are very strange because sometimes they include, let's say, facts about animals that are not only factually untrue, as at least as far as I know, but they would have known that because they spent way more time with deer and beavers and whatever else than I do, right? They just know way more about them. In which case, like, maybe they're noticing something that I haven't noticed, but at the end of the day, the idea there is that you could look, is that to use one medieval expression, nature's the first book that's been given to us, right? So I should be able to look at things. I'm looking out my window right now, and one of our geese is nesting just out past our pear tree, right out my window. So I can look at her right now, and she's sitting on her eggs, and she's grazing around her. There's some vines growing, and she's eating at them. So I should be able to look out my window. I should be able to look at something happening in nature, and I should be able to say, there's some kind of a lesson in this, right? God is telling us something here. So that's the idea there. Then you could say maybe nature parables is a bad execution, right? And so then trying to figure out, okay, what is it about nature parables that Brian doesn't like? Well, is it the fact that it feels like a little hokey? Is it the fact that it feels like a little, whatever it is? Then you could say, okay, the idea is good, but I think the execution is bad. And I've definitely run into things over the years doing. We stick like I said, we stick to the Ambleside list like pretty faithfully, I would say. But yeah, there's definitely things in there that I feel like the right idea, bad execution. One of the things that we should be trying to cultivate in our children is taste, which children don't have good taste. It's not built, not taste is something that's not built in.
Right. So in anything, food.
Yeah. Children start out with bad taste, and that is okay. They're children. That is part of the weakness we were talking about. The purpose of education, right, is the ordering of the loves. It's this trying to figure out, instead of, hey, you could have prime rib or chicken nuggets, and I want to teach you to always choose the prime rib. Why? Because it will be better for you eventually
Mm,
in the long term. If you're the kind of person who says, I would rather wait for prime rib than have chicken nuggets now,
mm,
then you're going to make a lot of good decisions that will ultimately bring you closer to Christ over the
mm,
course of the rest of your life. So you might say, well, I don't like this because I think the writing's not very good. It's a little hokey. It's a little sentimental.
mm.
It's a little sappy, something like that. So then you could say, okay, how do I teach them this? Um, but find it executed better somewhere else. And so
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
things
That's really
things like
helpful.
that. So I think that stepping back a little bit and just asking the question, all right, if I take my knee-jerk reaction, okay,
Mm,
Trial and Triumph, for instance, okay,
mhm.
well, I don't like that book. Why don't I like the book? Is it just because I'm this reactionary convert? Well, no, it's not that. It's that it is important. It's incredibly important to give our children stories of martyrs. But I don't like Trial and Triumph for two reasons. One is that it doesn't tell the whole story. There were just as many Roman Catholics martyred and tortured for their faith as there were Protestants during the Reformation. It was just a
Right.
bad time.
Right.
It
Right.
was a bad time. So the one thing is, I would want to give my children the whole story. And secondly, because their heritage and the faith that they've known their entire life is as Orthodox Christians, I want them to know the stories of our martyrs, and I want them to be beautifully told, and I want them to
Mm,
be told in a beautiful, the kind of non-polemical way. The thing that you should not come away with, and this is why I really dislike that book, is that your takeaway from that, or even something like the later chapters of Fox's Book of Martyrs,
mm,
is, oh, those evil, dirty Catholics, right?
mm,
But that's bad hagiography, actually, because what hagiography should do is put the focus on the saint as a person who's become totally transparent to Jesus Christ. So when you look
mm,
at their life, what you're really seeing is Christ. So
mm,
good hagiography does this. So you never read the hagiography of about the early, or the early martyrs, who were tortured under Diocletian, for instance, in the Synaxaria. You don't read the
mm.
life of Saint George or Saint Barbara or Saint Catherine and just think, those evil Romans, they're at it again. Which you
Sure.
look at Saint George, Saint Catherine, Saint Barbara, and you say, look at their devotion to Christ.
Mm,
Look how much they were willing to suffer for him. Look how glorious that is, and then look how God exalts them. Look how he proves, even before their death, that they're his, and the miracles that accompany their passing and all these different things, right? That's the thing that good hagiography should put your focus on. So that's just an example of why I would switch that book out. It's
yeah.
not just because it's Puritan, it's
Yeah.
because it also kind of fails at being good hagiography,
Yeah.
because it
Interesting.
creates this us versus them mentality instead of putting the focus on Christ.
Yeah. We we actually ran into that with that specific book of our uh, our oldest came home from our homeschool co-op one day, and one of the families is uh, converts to Roman Catholicism. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, my friend is Roman Catholic. I thought the Catholics were bad. It
Yeah,
said
yeah,
in
yeah,
such
yeah.
and such in the Trial and Triumph. Like, oh, okay. Well, we're gonna have to talk about this, and yeah, we might have to revisit also um, uh, that book as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, that is interesting. Even yeah, okay, yeah, I like what you said there. What and this I should have asked you before we started. Do you have a hard stop at any point?
Oh, top of the hour would
Yeah,
probably be
yeah,
good, right around
that's what
there.
I'm shooting
Yeah.
for. Okay, I think we have time for this though. What how do you're talking about uh, thinking about censoring and not making decisions based on fear. My wife and I go back and forth a bit on, when is it the right time to show this movie that
Yeah.
our family likes, or the two of us like, and she is definitely more cautious, and I'm more, it's fine. So, how do you think through those type of things? I would say it's pretty easy for me. Sexual matters for young children is obvious to avoid things like that. But something like Lord of the Rings, Uh, how do you think about?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Intense situations, graphic,
Hmm.
violence, and so
Hmm.
on. Well, this for us is also a constant struggle, and the problem is like the worst thing about children and the best thing about children
Mm.
is that they are different people from day to day.
Yeah.
They are growing faster than we are growing, right? At
Mm.
some point as an adult, your personality becomes more or less kind of fixed into place. And it's not totally true that no growth or development happens, but it's not anywhere on the level of what happens to children.
Mm.
Like with children, from day to day, like your teenager wakes up and it's like you're a completely different human being than the one who went to bed last night, and you have completely different goals and anxieties and all these different things. Like, what do I, so because they're constantly changing, something that is okay for a kid today might actually not be okay for them tomorrow. And something that's, and vice versa. And so a lot of this just comes down to, again, we have to trust ourselves a little bit as parents, right? You're the parent that God gave this child.
Mm.
So, first of all, just like, what is your instinct about what's going to be good for little John, little Mary?
Mhm.
Like, what's your instinct, first of all, about what's going to be good for them? Secondly, um, you know, when is the right time to introduce something? Kind of depends on what food have they been fed on to up till this time. So to
Mm.
give my prime rib example,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna give an uncut prime rib to my 1-year-old daughter,
Right.
right? If she's going to enjoy that, I'm gonna have to cut up into very, very tiny pieces and give her those pieces one at a time.
Yeah. And you're not
Oh,
gonna give her, baby food for 10 years and then, "You're 11 now, here's a
yes,
steak."
yes, exactly. So
Yeah.
you sort of like you have to, and I think that one basic rule that we have is, if there's a movie that's based on a book, you have to read the book first.
Yeah, of course.
And that's a good reason for a good rule for a lot of reasons. But one of them is that there is um, when you read a book, very usually your mind will kind of filter out the things that you're not ready for right at that
Mm.
time. So you can
Hmm.
read the book, and then I mean, just you know, we grew up Baptist, right? Think about all the times you read through the Bible and
True.
read those really intense things, and you just had no idea what was going on as a kid. You just like your mind just kind of skipped right over it. Whereas with a film, all of the stuff is forced on you. So read the book first, talk to the kid about it, and say, "Hey, what did you like? What didn't you like?" But then also pay attention to the things that their mind kind of rejected or skipped over in the story. Those might be things they're not quite ready for yet.
Mm.
And then obviously the depictions of violence, depictions of anything else on a screen are always going to be much more intense. So you just got to see like what's the kid ready for?
Yeah.
We do watch Lord of the Rings with our kids every year. We watch the full
Yeah.
extended trilogy on. That's what we do the week after Pascha, which is our Easter.
Yeah.
Which after Holy Week and Pascha, we've been in church for like 60 hours. We've been up all night, and so
Wow.
by the time Monday, Bright Monday rolls around, everybody just wants to lay around. So that's what we do. We lay around, we eat cheese, and we watch Lord of the Rings. And that's what we do as a family.
Mm.
And it has been interesting. We've been doing this a few years now. It's been
Mm.
interesting to watch the kids and they're basically different levels, being able to handle certain things at different times.
Mm.
And that's totally okay. Basically, it's just on, and you can watch it or not watch it. And we haven't seen any bad effects from that. But I would just say, you have to
Yeah.
take kind of all of these things into consideration. The first time that a child is introduced to death, like death in a
Mhm.
real impactful way,
Mm.
it is the crossing of a river which cannot be uncrossed.
Hmm.
And so you have to think about, when is that introduction going to happen? Are they going to see somebody graphically killed on screen? I'm not again talking about Aragorn like killing an orc. That's not the kind of death we're talking about. But Boromir's death, that feels like a real death.
Yeah.
Is it going to be, it's processing day and they get to watch dad kill the bunnies? Is it going to be, is it go, what
Yeah,
what
a
what is
funeral.
your first introduction to the concept of this thing is alive and now it's not anymore? What
Right.
is that going to be, and when is that going to happen? Um, and I don't think
Yeah.
there's not a universal answer to what's good for. The funny thing is that about half of farm kids grow up and they're like, oh yeah, we I used to ring chickens, and I'd go out and
Yeah.
pull a rabbit and break his neck and bring him in and cook him. And like half of us are like that, and the other half of farm kids are like, my dad killed my favorite bunny and we ate it for dinner that night, and that's why I've been a vegan the rest of my life. Like, I'm just deeply scarred from that experience. So
Yeah.
I don't know what's actually, I tend to think that more traditional ways of being
Mm.
are probably more reliable. So
Mm.
that's what we try to do. But I do worry about it. Yeah. So
Sure. Oh man. Okay. Well, I think we about used up all our time, and we didn't get to talk about the school that you were involved with.
yeah,
Do you want to do a 2 minute
sure.
on that,
So I'm
and then we'll wrap
involved.
it up?
Right now, being involved just means that I'm on the board of the St. Constantine School, Dallas.
Mm.
So there's a large, very successful Orthodox classical school in Houston, Texas, called the St. Constantine School, and we have been hard at work for the last few years trying to create a new St. Constantine schools around the country, namely in Pittsburgh and in Dallas right now. So
Mm.
I'm on the board of that school. Turns out that starting a school is no kind of way to make a living. I don't know if anybody knows this, but it's been had a lot of difficulties, but it's also a very beautiful thing to be a part of. I don't have a lot to say about it. I mean, I'm not a
Yeah.
teacher. I'm not in charge of the curriculum or anything like that. I'm just
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
board. But I do think that it is going to be very important as the movement that we're in matures to start some good schools,
Mm.
whether it's cottage schools or larger, more organized schools, whatever it is, because not everybody can homeschool. Not everybody should homeschool.
Yeah.
And sometimes homeschooling is the right thing when a kid is one age, and then they grow out of that, especially boys
Sure.
sometimes hit an age where they do not need their mom to be their primary teacher anymore.
Mm.
And that relationship kind of has to change.
Mhm.
So it is important that we have these schools around. And if somebody is doing something like this near where you live, you should see what you can do to support it, even if it doesn't mean sending your kids there right now.
Mm.
I would just recommend people to find a way to find people who are doing something good like that and support it. Obviously, co-ops are a nice middle of the road thing, it seems like, for a lot of people.
Mhm.
I will say there is this part of us as homeschoolers that is very reluctant to relinquish control, which is why
Mm.
all of our co-ops don't last more than 2 or 3 years. And it's why all of our, just real talk, guys, real talk. So also be aware of that impulse in ourselves,
Yeah.
and that sort of fear and distrust of other people, like,
Mm.
which might be the reason you started homeschooling to begin with. And it's not totally off base if you just look at the world around you, but also we need to really think about how to handle it better when it gets in
Yeah.
the way of us actually being able to live in community with one another. So
Yeah. Yeah. And a good reminder that homeschooling is a sliding scale. Everyone, even if you're sending your children to a public school or a private school, you're still teaching them things at home. You're still doing
that's right.
all sorts of stuff. Even if you're homeschooling, you're still probably taking your children to, Sunday school or
I
some
mean,
other
at the end
religious
of the day, a
instruction.
public school, to flip it around a little bit, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, the public school teacher does not have a responsibility to educate your children. They just
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
have a responsibility to fulfill the requirements of the state.
Right.
But if you want your child to get an education, that's on you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the best place to end. So, thanks again. Oh, anything else that we didn't already mention that you wanted to plug?
No, I don't think so. Like I said, if
Okay.
people want to hear cool stories about
Yeah.
Christians in early Ireland, you can check the
Great Rood Screen
Great Rood
is
Screen. If you
really
want to
good.
learn about medieval history and what it has to do with understanding what's happening in the world today, you can check out Universal History on the Symbolic World. If you just want, like kid/teenager appropriate read-throughs of great works of Western civilization, you can check out the Great Tales podcast. These are just some of the podcasts which I have going, but I'll just mention those 3 as being maybe the most useful. I know a lot of homeschoolers who basically just use our Great Tales podcast as like their lit hour each week. So
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure all of your podcasts are just, I should homeschool my children this. I'm gonna start a podcast and then make them listen. Am I correct?
Sort of, but no. Like the funny, my kids do sometimes listen, but
Yeah.
I think it just sort of, the running joke for a while now has been that, it's all one podcast. Like it's just like the same three people doing the same podcast, 5 different places. At the end of the day, I'm just very interested in old stories and storytelling, and in what the stories that make life actually worth living. And the main people I live with are my wife and my children, and so telling them those stories is so pretty much everything I work on. Actually, it sort of goes the other way. It basically, everything that I work on starts out as, we have a big fire pit here at the house, and we sit out there usually at least one night a week, and we make a big bonfire, and I tell stories to the kids. And I try to do this, and I've been working with Dr. Martin Shaw, who's an amazing oral storyteller, to really develop my storytelling abilities. And so basically almost everything I do now starts as something with the kids around the fire pit, and then only later on does it become a talk or a podcast or something like that. So it's more like they're the test audience for everything.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, and the it's all one podcast makes sense from the perspective of universal history being about everything being one story, and Charlotte Mason's Education is the Science of Relations.
That's right.
So there we go. Tied it all together.
There you go. Nice.
All right. Well, I know you're a busy guy. Yeah. Thanks so much for responding to a stranger's request. This is the first time I've ever done this after 200 episodes of podcasting, to just reach out to someone on the internet that we've never met. So appreciate you giving up an hour, and I really enjoyed it.
Very happy to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me on. Send over the link whenever it goes live. I'll share it around. So.
All right. It will do.
All right.
All right.